So, of all of the things that we're going to do, this is the kind of the simplest, most straightforward, least complicated portion that we're going to undertake. There's nothing to have to convince people of. There's no arguments to make. You don't have to be persuasive or anything else. You've just got to be really, really thorough and explain what it is that you're doing. Who were your participants? How did you recruit them? Why did you pick these people to include or exclude? Did you use men? Did you use women? What was their age range, right? Did they have some history of exercising or not? Like, how did you make all of those decisions? And then we're going to get into kind of what the actual sort of assignment from people from one condition to the next, and then your measures that you were making, right? So there's a lot of different ways that people write these, and I'm pretty flexible with you guys on the order in which you're going to put things in. But traditionally, when you write chapter 3, you discuss two things initially, and then before you get into the actual experiment that you did, okay? Those two things are going to be, what was your research design, okay? Was this a cross-sectional study? Is this a longitudinal training study? Is this for my tart cherry juice? Is this a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study or something like that, okay? Most of you, given what you want to do, you're going to be doing what we would call sort of a cross-sectional or a correlational study, right? You are sampling a bunch of people at one point in time, and we're going to look and see if people that have some characteristics are going to look different or have different relationships to things as people with other characteristics. But the first thing that we want to talk about generally is what's the experimental design, okay? That sets the stage for everything. The next thing that we want to talk about is going to be, who were you testing? Who were your participants, okay? And to get at some of that, we want to talk about, how do we sample them? What did you do to find the people that were in your study, okay? For many of you, it's going to be, I wrote a flyer and I gave it to Dr. Black and he put it on the mass mail server and we sent it to all students at OU, which is great when I send it to 27,000 people and I get 1,000 emails from people saying like that email address is dead, or I no longer work here. Please send this to my other thing, or whatever. We just delete those, okay? But how did you get the people, right? We were looking to get, 200 people to fit that were men and women in this age range, and we tried to get them by sending out emails. Or maybe we put something on our social media so that our friends could see it. Put it on my Instagram account or something like that, okay? So we're going to talk about how are we doing this and where are we going. And then really, for most of you guys, you're not going to have a group or a condition assignment for the most part. Most of you, it's either I had COVID or I didn't have COVID when we did this, right? Or everybody that responds gets included, basically. There's not a lot of kind of splitting. For my tart cherry juice group, you all will have to talk about why did they pick which condition to get first, right? They're going to get a placebo or they're going to get the cherry juice, and kind of which one do we pick to give them first, which will all be really good to talk about that. But that's kind of what else goes in here. Most of you guys, because they're cross-section, there's no real kind of condition or group assignment. You're not doing anything to people. And then you just have to write up, like, what did you do? We gave them a questionnaire. We asked them about their anxiety. We used this particular questionnaire that we found online. Here is a citation that says that questionnaire is a valid and reliable way to measure anxiety or sleep or depression, okay? And so in a normal thing, you just list, here's the questionnaire that we used. And then at the end, you have an appendix and you just insert the questionnaire there, right? And you don't have to, in the methods, type out every individual question that was asked. You could just refer people to Appendix 1 contains all of our questionnaires, right? We used the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index to measure sleep. And we asked people to recall things over the previous week. And you put the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index at the end. If you make up questions of your own, you should probably write those. Like, we got them from this, we modified them based upon this other thing. But that's really what goes in kind of after you've talked about what is your design, who is in the study, then it's just writing up in lots of detail, here's what we did. Okay? Typically, that is broken down into multiple paragraphs where for every kind of dependent measure that you have, for every variable of interest on your questionnaire, you're going to have a paragraph talking about that. Okay? We did this to measure anxiety and this to measure depression. We did this to measure physical activity. We did this to measure sleep or something, whatever is going to go in there. And then also, many of those questionnaires are going to have published ranges of scores, right? And so people on a particular anxiety questionnaire may say, if your score is above this, then there's a likelihood that you have generalized anxiety disorder. Okay. Yay. Dr. Black's like, yep, it's working today. Okay. GAD is really kicking in right now with all of that. Or a score of this means a person might potentially be clinically depressed, or a score over this means they're not. There's going to be some things like that you're also going to want to include in your paragraph describing the instrument that you use. Okay? For Brady, who's going to be doing some actual exercise and some other testing things for my cherry juice group, if you're doing a bout of exercise, or you're making some kind of a measure like a vertical jump or something like that, then you want to list out, how did you do that, right? They showed up. They came on one day, and then we had them sit down and they did paperwork. And then we had them do 5 minutes of jogging and a stretching warm up. And then they did a vertical jump. And here are the exact instructions that they got to do all of that, right? We told them to start with their feet shoulder width apart, and then they were to squat down and stay on balance or something, and then explode upward with as much sort of force and velocity as possible and reach as high as they can and swat the thing on the vertex. Or we asked them, we tested their 1 rep max strength, and so here's how we did that. Okay? That's what goes in the method section. It's not hard, but it may take a while, and it can be excruciatingly boring. Okay? But that's okay. It's meant to be that way. But it needs to be detailed enough that somebody could read this. Okay? Your parents or your grandparents, or I don't know, pick someone that doesn't really kind of know all the stuff that you know about our major, somebody could read this and they could at least go and repeat the experiment that you did. That's the point of the method section. Okay? And the very last piece of the method section is going to be a paragraph on the statistics that you're going to run, which we will save and not talk about right now, because we're going to do an individual thing for each group for your statistics assignment. Okay? And so we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Once we've kind of started getting some data, we'll do that. Okay? Okay. Let me see what else I have on here, things to kind of keep in mind. Okay? So some of you have probably seen some of these terms before. But if you're using a questionnaire, or you're using a vertical jump or a 1 rep max or some measure, we want that measure to be both valid and reliable if possible. Okay? Reliable basically means that we get the same value from the test every time we do the test. It's consistent. Okay? It's consistent. If I have Yvonne squeeze a grip strength for me, we're going to get the same number every time that she does it. Okay? And we're going to get the same number today as she will give us tomorrow. Or if we have Demetria do a vertical jump today and tomorrow, we're going to get the same values. Okay? Lots of things that we do. Okay? Most of the questionnaires that you guys have already talked about using as I've kind of been around should have previous studies where they have assessed the reliability of that questionnaire. Okay? So we want to try to find those things and we want to cite it in the method section. We use the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index to measure sleep quality. It has been shown to be both valid and reliable citation. Okay? So the idea of reliability, what we want to try to avoid is the effects of motivation and the effects of what we call learning effects or practice effects on things. I take it once, I figure it out, so I'm going to be better at it tomorrow. Or maybe Yvonne's mad at me and she doesn't want to squeeze the grip thing today. She's like, no, I don't want to do this. Okay? So if I squeeze too much, you're going to make me do something else in class, and so I'm not going to squeeze very hard. Happens all the time. Okay? Those are going to be the things that we need to kind of pay attention to. So everything that you're doing, we would like for it to be reliable. Okay? I'm going to ask you to try to find something to cite to prove to me and yourself that your instrument or your test is reliable. Okay? The other piece that goes into this is something called validity. For a test or a measure to be valid, all that really means is that it's actually measuring the thing that we want it to measure. I give you a question on anxiety, and it's actually measuring anxiety, not depression or not fatigue or something like that. Okay? So there's different types of validity that I don't really want to get into. There's this idea called internal validity. There's this idea of external validity. There's something called face validity and these kinds of things. But realistically, all that we really care about is that the measure you have is valid. Okay? And so there are usually, for most questionnaires, there have been studies that have validated that questionnaire. So if I give you a questionnaire on anxiety, and you say that it's valid, well, like, is there an objective way to measure how anxious you are? The answer is no. Okay? It's just that we give it to a bunch of people and we think that, you know, it kind of measures what we think it's going to measure. So I don't want us to get too bogged down in kind of what exactly validity is, but I want you to look for whatever your measure is, right? Is there a study that shows that it's valid? There are some things that are threats to validity, okay? And so participant history, participant maturation over the course of your study may be a threat to validity, okay? I'm getting better at doing something, and so now it's no longer reliable, so now it's no longer going to be valid. For most of the stuff that you guys are doing, this isn't going to be a problem, okay? The biggest threats to validity that you guys are going to encounter are going to be the idea of instrumentation and the idea of selection. Okay? Is your instrument good? Okay? Is it going to somehow change in its calibration or something like all of that? So if you're using a questionnaire that you have found, that's probably not going to be a big deal. If you ask people questions that you guys have made up on your own, then there may be some issues surrounding all of that. The real big one, though, is going to be selection. Okay? How many of you think that you can get your friends to do your study? A few of you? Okay. Do you think that introduces a bias? Do you think your friends care about you enough that they want your study to go well? And if, like, you've told them, like, it's like, no, mine don't care. So, but if you've talked about your study with the other people, somebody else in class who's your friend, and you're like, oh yeah, right? Like, we're interested in grades and sleep quality. And they're like, yeah, like, I think there's a thing. So when I ask those questions, I'll be like, yeah, my grades are good, so I must sleep pretty good, right? There's going to be implicit bias that we can't ever get rid of entirely. But sometimes, for certain studies, y'all's are going to be a little bit less so, but for some studies, people that are willing to volunteer to take your survey or to have the tart cherry juice or test something like that, they want to do this, and that may influence the outcome. Okay, they may come into things thinking a certain thing about your experiment that may influence it. Okay, and so all that we can do with this is just try to tell people, be honest. Don't think about the outcome very much. Don't tell people what you're looking for, you know, in in some ways. Don't tell them about kind of what you're postulating your hypotheses or your relationships to do. Okay? So it's less of a thing now for what you guys are doing, but it can be more of an issue like with the vaccine studies, with drug studies, with supplement studies, with diet studies, and things like that. That some people want to be in these things. Okay? They want to be in it. They want to believe that something is working or not working. They want a chance, like in these cancer clinical trials. They'll take the experimental because they want to get better so badly, and that may play some influence on kind of what their outcomes are going to be. But there's just no other way around it. Okay? So we talked about sampling. The terminology is pretty straightforward. Okay? So when you report your sample, okay, you're going to talk about what your target population is. Our target population for our study was college-aged men and women, something very simple like that. And so we tried to sample from that population by doing mass mail to college students or post on social media that's mostly followed by college-aged students, or by having these set criteria where you have to be in a certain age range. So we're gonna talk about this. You can say, here's what our population was. Here's what our sample, kind of how we tried to get those people. And then once we're done, we're gonna come back in and put in the methods, how many people you actually got, okay? We were shooting to try to get 200 people, and we got 223 or something like that, okay? So we're gonna put those two things in. So we talked about that, we talked about random sampling, we talked about these things already. Probability sampling. So you're going to want to put in there as well, did you have probability sampling or non-probability sampling as you try to get your participants, okay? So if possible, we want to do probability sampling, where basically everybody who fits in our population has some equal and known chance of getting picked to be in our experiment, okay? In practice, this is almost impossible, right? If you guys have a target population of all OU students, there's no way that everybody, like your friends who follow you on social media, if you post it there, are going to be more likely than somebody that doesn't follow you on social media but is an OU student, okay? Not everybody, some of you are included in this, right? You send OU mass mails right to your junk folder. You never look at them. You're tired of being bombarded by things. We know this, okay? I send these out all the time. And so not everybody has an equal chance of getting picked, basically with how you guys are going to do this. That's okay. That's a limitation, okay? We would love to do this, but it's really hard for us to get a really good chance of doing all of this. Mostly what you guys are doing is what's called non-probability sampling. There are no sort of random processes used. And that's not 100% true, okay? You can almost say you guys are going to do like quasi-probability sampling, which just means that a subgroup, which are people that are likely to see this email or follow me on social media or something, okay, be in my fraternity or sorority or go to my church or whatever it might be, where you have access to a large group of people where you could share this, okay, there's a sort of random chance that any of those people could volunteer. It's more random than just like, I'm going to just wander by and be like, I'm picking, right? I want Allison, and I want Daniel, right? And I want Mindy, and those kinds of things. It's more random than that. So that's kind of where we are. So you guys are going to mostly do all of this. This introduces a little bit of bias, but there's not a lot that we can do about it. Okay? Those are sampling, blah, blah, blah. Convenience, what you guys are going to be doing for the most part is called a convenience sample. Okay? A sample of accessible individuals. You're going to pick people that you are conveniently going to be able to have access to. We're not going to go way out of our way to try to go to the Health Science Center and lurk outside of, I don't know, the human physiology class. Teacher's like, what now? lurk outside of the human physiology class that the PA students and the nursing students take, because that's who you want to try to get, okay? We could do that, but that would be purposive sampling, right? Purposive sampling. You know what you want, and you're trying to target those people individually. Convenience, y'all just said, we're going to take whoever we can manage to get, right? That is sort of this way. Right? Does that make sense to you guys? My wife used to talk about that one of my friends in grad school, he was a convenience dater, right? He always seemed to date someone who just happened to kind of be in the sphere of his lab as another grad student when we were there. And she would always shake his head because they never ended well. And she was like, maybe look for someone, that's not just happens to be the person you see every day. That's maybe not the best criteria for finding a partner. Anyway, he is married now. They have 2 lovely kids. It's going great. He managed to figure that part of it out. But I always think of that. My wife sort of coined that before we kind of knew what this was. Snowball sampling is like a snowball rolling down a hill. You get one person, and then they tell you about their friends, and you get a couple of them from that, and then they tell you about some of their friends, and so it sort of snowballs and it builds upon itself. This is especially helpful if you're targeting a population of people that are a little bit more difficult to reach and have kind of certain kind of characteristics, right? So you guys really probably won't be doing a lot of snowball sampling. Sampling error, sampling bias, who cares? This is going to be a thing that you guys have all asked me about, and I don't have a good answer for. How many people do you need to test? What do you think? You just pick somebody. 25 or 30. Seems very reasonable, Daniel. How did you arrive at that number?
No, it's some stats. I forget something in stats. I remember saying that's like power. It's something about power. I don't remember.
These are words that are correct, and they do apply to statistics. It is about power, sort of in that way. Statistical power increases with larger samples, but how many do you need? Taylor, how many people do you think you guys need? 150, okay? Where did you pull that number from? Seems like a good, reasonable number? Nowhere. Why not 160? Let's do it, right? 160. All right, Mighty, what do you think you guys need? The same, more, less? 161, okay. It is, that's what I was thinking. It's like the price is right. Like, no, $1 on these things. So there is a method, okay, where we can try to calculate the number of people that we probably need to get to complete your study, okay? So the idea behind this, and we'll talk a lot more about it when we get into statistics. I'm going to make you guys watch a thing from a lovely PBS show called Nova on the inference and these kinds of things. Maybe they can talk to you about running stats, and you'll like it better than me because it has like fun sounds and stuff. But there is error in your sampling, and then there is error that can be induced in your measures by simple kind of random things that just happen to take place. And so when we run statistics on your data, what we are trying to determine is there a difference or a relationship that exists, and is it real, right? Is there some probability that difference or that relationship could exist just simply by random chance based upon the people that you've sampled, okay? And so what we know is that for correlational studies, which most of you guys are going to do, we need a larger sample in order to make sure that we reduce our chance of sort of these relationships happening kind of randomly, and us capturing them randomly, so that we can be more certain that if something exists, it's real, or if something doesn't exist, that's also real, okay? And there is a way based upon what we expect the size of that or the strength of that relationship to be, and what we expect your sampling error to be, and what we expect the error in your measurement tool to be, for us to try to guess at about where this needs to be, okay? we're not going to do a whole lot of that. I want you to appreciate that it's a thing that exists. But if you guys have an older study that's done just what you want to do, and they had a certain number of people, or they found a relationship to be a certain strength, or there was a 10% difference, then we can say, we're going to expect a 10% difference. So at a 10% difference, with this much statistical power, at this particular kind of sampling error, then we would need to test X number, 50 people, to find that same 10% difference or something. There's a way for us to do all of that. And that's half a stats course for me to try to teach you guys kind of how and why all of that works, okay? But there's a way. We're going to eschew that way. If you're doing a correlational thing, which most of you guys are, we're just going to take as many people as we can get, okay? Probably 75 or 100 people would be plenty. I anticipate most of you guys will be able to get north of 200, okay? I think we had one last year where they got like 600 responses on something. Somebody was quite the influencer on Instagram. I will just say that. Or they had a friend that was an influencer. And I use the word influencer very loosely, but with all of that, okay? And so the same thing for like Brady and for Daniel, for y'all's group that wanted to actually do some sort of an exercise test on people, then based upon the size of the difference we think we're going to see between our placebo and our tart cherry juice, or what we would expect, we can also then do some calculations. And I can help you guys with all of that. But for the most part, for a correlational thing, 75 or 100 folks is pretty good for an in-person kind of experiment. If you've got 10 or 12 people in each group that you're trying to compare, then that should be a pretty kind of reasonable thing. If it's something where we're testing the safety of the drug, or we're testing the vaccine or things, then we probably need, multiple tens of thousands of people. Okay? So when we're done and I turn the recording off, I'll ask if you guys know people, maybe it's some of you that are not interested in getting the vaccine, and kind of the whys. Because we've given like 50,000 vaccines or 60,000 vaccines now, and there's basically, aside from a few kind of allergic reactions to the Pfizer or the Moderna ones, and very, very small number of people, basically it seems like it's safe. Like if you've given it to 50 million people, then you would think if it was going to consistently be bad, we'd see those kind of side effects by or something. So, which I find to be an encouraging thing. As someone who's gotten one dose, I don't want there to be side effects. So, okay, sample sizes, general rules of thumb, blah, blah, blah. Larger samples may be needed, sampling mistakes, Writing the method section. Okay, we'll kind of wrap up with this, okay? The goal is to describe very precisely what it was that you did in your experiment, okay? Describe your sample size, your sampling technique. Who are your participants, right? What are their characteristics? Height, weight, age, sex, okay? If it matters, socioeconomic status, education status, whatever it is that may be pertinent, okay? Describe them, describe your design. And then describe your measures and your instruments and any instructions that you gave to people while they were doing all of this, and they were taking this, okay? Better here to write more and write too much than to write not enough. Okay, it's better to put me to sleep when I'm reading it, because I'm like, there's way too much here, I'm bored, than it is for me to say, like, this is 2 pages. Why is it 2 pages? What did you do? Okay, so that's kind of the take home of this. Be very precise in the way you word things. Be very precise in your descriptions, and provide, if you're using an instrument like a questionnaire, then provide that instrument for us to put in the appendix so we can actually have that to refer to. Okay, so with our remaining half an hour or so, okay, what I want you guys to do is to try to make a little progress on an outline for chapter 3. I want you to do some very, very simple things, like write out for me, while I'm here in our 30 minutes, what is your experimental design? What do you think your design is? Write out, who do you anticipate your participants to be, okay? College-age students, only men, only women, whatever. Write out kind of what that is. And then at least just sort of jot down, here's what our 3 or 4 or 10 measures are going to be. And if you have a questionnaire already in mind for those, just write out the name. You don't have to write all the instructions or anything else, but let's at least try to work our way through some of that so we have a kind of skeleton of this to build upon going forward. Okay? All right. Questions, comments, problems?